For some people, they'll tell you straight S&P 500. It's safer, you're very diversified, and the S&P 500 has returned around 10% over the past 30 years. For me, I felt individual stocks was the way to go because it will grow faster, and fortunately, it worked out for me. And even though the market fluctuates, let's say the market goes down really badly this year and I needed to pull money out for my child for school, I'm okay taking out a loan and just waiting it out. Plus, as I told you, I was like a big insurance person. So we have whole life insurance. There's cash value on that policy. So for me, I know that if the market goes down, there are other places that I could pull money out in the meantime, including taking out a loan to pay for their tuition until the market goes up.
Welcome to Personal Finance Cat, where I share my personal take on personal finance.
Tanya, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, of course. So can you tell us what is your focus? I think you are a financial coach for individuals.
Yes, I am.
You also help companies. Can you talk about what is that you do?
Absolutely. So I'll talk about the personal first, then the company. So the whole goal of my program is to help people become more financially savvy, feel more confident with their finances, regardless of where they are on their journey, because everyone is at a different pace on their journey and a different mindset. So basically, what I do, I bring someone into my program. I start with them with the mindset work because a lot of time that's where it needs to start, and just teach them or help them along the journey, whether they want to learn to invest, fix their credit, manage debt, or plan for retirement. And in the corporate space, that I'm looking to do something similar for corporations, whether it's the larger ones or the smaller companies that I've worked with, which is just doing more workshop type training with these individuals, and then take them on as clients where I can work with them one-on-one, because a lot of individuals in corporations or employees often talk about their companies may offer financial awareness programs, but they don't usually take advantage because sometimes it's just really difficult to find, etc. So having the on-site training and then taking them on, coaching them for their individual situation.
I see. So is it fair to say that what you coach your individual clients is similar to the coaching that you do in a company setting, but maybe to a group of people?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And what topics do you cover usually?
Mindset, budget, credit, debt, investing, which is I find to be one of the scary topic for a lot of people, and just planning for retirement. Like, do you have a goal for your retirement? What does that look like, and how do we ensure that you shore that up? And a lot of people don't know about their retirement plan and what they have inside of it. So just really helping them to understand, if they are employed by an organization, okay, what is inside of your retirement plan? Are you maximizing how you're allocating the funds that you're contributing to your retirement plan to make sure that you can achieve that goal that you have set, or that we're going to set together? Because a lot of people don't have a goal either.
Yeah. What have you seen as some of the, let's say, shocking lessons that people take away from your training?
Oh my goodness, there are so many.
What are the highlights? Yeah.
I had this one client, she was in her 30s, and she had her retirement in an account earning her 2% a year. It was called a fixed account. And when we sat down and I kind of went to her, if you keep your money here, it's going to take you like 36 years in order to double a dollar in your account. So for her, when she realized it, and it was this fear, like she was saying, I'm afraid to put it in other things because I'm afraid that I'm going to lose all my money. So taking that fear away was important. Another client that I had, she was spending $8,000 a month on Uber Eats. And she had no idea that she was. And I think there's a lot of people that don't realize how much you're spending. So for her, like, that was a huge takeaway. She was able to cut that in less than half and put money away in her emergency fund because she didn't have any emergency fund set up. So those are just two like very clear, tangible examples that just jumped out at me right away.
That's great. I think that a lot of people probably really need that kind of education and service. So I think while we're on that topic, I think there is a financial literacy gap in this country, right? So what do you think is causing that? And what do you think we can do to help closing that gap?
Well, for starters, young children are not taught about personal finance. And if you're young, you don't know personal finance, you grow up to become adult, right? And adults who have children. If you're an adult and you don't know certain basic things for yourself, you're not going to be able to pass that knowledge on to your child. And so there is this cycle. So I think that's the first problem, is that there isn't that entry level education, and then there isn't that education going forward, even in college. You're graduating from school, a doctor making six figure or a tech person making six figure, and you don't know basic things like, I need to create a budget because I need to know how much I have coming in and how much I have coming out. And then if I take out all of this debt, eventually I'm going to have to repay it. Basic things like compound interest. I say basic because when it gets down to it, if we really explain to someone what that is and they understand it, they realize like, oh my God, like if I have a credit card or if I have a student loan debt and compound interest is working against me, I'm going to be in debt for a very long time. On the opposite end, compound interest work great if you are investing, if you're putting your money away, right, and you're getting that interest and it's multiplying. So I think if we were to say even like what is it that's causing this gap, it's really just a lack of education, and then the cycle that keeps continuing, and just basic things that are not known that can help to start closing that gap.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about maybe yourself and how did you learn over, I want to say the last decades even, and you had a wide, broad experience range in your professional careers. Can you talk about your journey? How did you go from a corporate employee and I think at some point working for the Federal Reserve to currently being, I want to say, you're a self-employed entrepreneur serving as a financial coach? Can you talk about that?
So my journey was very interesting because so I came to America, I was 16, I had $100 and I was alone. So I had to figure out how to manage my money. So I started budgeting at a really young age, and I knew that everybody around me, like I thought that people lived well in America, and then I came here and I realized nobody did. So I wanted to not be one of those individuals who just had a job living paycheck to paycheck. I wanted something different. So I started setting goals and I started budgeting. And when I hit 25, which was my goal, was graduate college, buy a house, and do a couple other things, which I did. And I landed a job in corporate. I was making decent money, but I was still realizing that my salary alone was not going to be enough. So I started learning to invest, and the investing grew significantly, both for myself in my retirement and for my children for their college portfolio. And I had set a goal to leave corporate at 45 to have $1 million in my portfolio, in my retirement portfolio, and to save for my children for college. So in between that span, I was actually teaching personal finance. Everything that I consumed and learned, I was going out, I was teaching it in schools, community organization, churches, wherever I could, because that was my passion. And because in our community, the Black community, there is a gap in general, but in our community, there is an even wider gap. And so I wanted to start teaching people that. So that was like a hobby. But I knew that once I left corporate, that I wanted to turn it into a business. And so 3 years ago, I was still in corporate. I was deciding whether or not to take my dream job or go into business for myself. But then I had a car accident, which kind of just put everything on pause. And I call it my redirection. Ultimately, I ended up not being able to work in corporate anymore because I just couldn't, because of my accident, and just really pursuing my business. But I had all of that knowledge for the past 20 something years teaching personal finance. So it was just almost like a natural transition into teaching individuals. I started taking on individual clients and then branching out into working with different corporations and organizations.
Got it. So when you learned, did you learn by doing, or did you learn by reading books? Did you learn by taking courses? What was that like?
It was a combination of everything. So, and some was trial and error. For example, when I started investing in my retirement plan, it was because someone said, if you put money in, like the company would match it. And I was like, oh, free money. So let me put money in. But then once I started putting money in, I wanted to know, okay, if I set a goal, I would always hear, like, I'll go to conferences. So my job sent me to conferences, and then anything personal finance I would start consuming because I wanted to be rich. And so I started learning about, okay, what's inside of my retirement portfolio and how do I maximize that? But the interesting thing is that I gave my money to a money manager, portfolio manager, to manage on my behalf, because that's what I was hearing I was supposed to do. And I realized my money was actually going down. So then I started to learn even more and started to teach myself. And this was through reading books. This was through going to conferences. And this was also through talking to people who were in the field and understanding what are some of the things that I needed to know in order to be able to make money and to get rich. And ultimately I started taking courses. So even before I started my business, I did the AICPA, which is an association for CPAs. They have this program, it's called PFP, but you become like a certified, like it's like a certified professional teaching personal finance. And even though I haven't gotten my certification yet, but I took a lot of the courses. And to be quite honest, a lot of it was just a lot of time people like to see that you have certain certifications. So I did it, but I had already learned so much of it just whether through doing or just through my own research, because I wanted that knowledge and I wanted to be able to impart it on others.
Gotcha. That's great. And so I want to touch on what you mentioned briefly, was the accident that you called a redirection. It sounds like it was a huge challenge, but maybe, in retrospect, it's a blessing in disguise. So how did that change sort of your perspective in general? And maybe was that sort of propellant for you to start your business in a way?
Yeah. So I had put all the I guess the groundwork in place for my business, and I was literally on that cusp where I was like, okay, I'm going to leave the Federal Reserve, I'm going to start my business. And there's always that little fear inside of you. So in our profession, a lot of times recruiters come after you to recruit you for a role, like you don't have to go out and look for a job. So right around the time that I decided that I was going to leave and just do this full time, the recruiter came, and it was the exact dream job. Like I literally had it written down. This is my dream job that I wanted to leave corporate with. And I interviewed for it. Interview went well. Even when I was interviewing, I was like, yeah, I'm still going to do my business. But a couple of things that came out of that, I ended up not getting that job, obviously. I was in pain for I'm literally just recovering, like just at the point now where I feel like I could go around as freely as I want. I could sit for an hour for a podcast. I wasn't able to do a lot of those things. So, but it reinforced for me a couple things, that I do not want to be in corporate anymore. I really want to focus in on working with individuals. I had also was at that point where I felt like I had all of the pieces in place that I could survive financially on my own. But when that disability hit, I had a number of other things that also kind of like the trickle down effect. So for example, we ended up spending a lot on Uber Eats because I couldn't cook. I had to hire my own physical therapist. My tenant stopped paying me rent. And there was something else that happened that I can't remember, but it was also, my daughter got ill, and her she wasn't covered by my insurance. So a lot of those expenses came down the pike. And I had long-term disability through my job. But one of the critical things that I learned, and is one of the things that I really am trying to educate people on too, is the importance of long-term disability. Because while it solidified for me that I needed to go and just do my business and just educate people more, the long-term disability, if you become disabled, a lot of organizations only cover 60% of your income. And so did my employer. So imagine 60% of your income, and you're deducting tax and you're deducting medical benefits. Your income now is very, very small. And can you live off that income? And for a lot of people, the answer is no. So one of the advice that I give to anyone in earshot is get a supplemental disability policy to cover that gap between your current income and the income that you are going to lose. And even for self-employed individuals, I'm always advocating for them to go out and get long-term disability insurance. A lot of people think about insurance is a scam. I'm never going to use it. I'm never going to become disabled. Nobody ever thinks that they're going to become disabled. And for me, had I not had that supplemental policy, and I still got into debt. Like, I was a person who never really had debt, but with everything coming down the pike, I still got into debt. But if I didn't have that supplemental policy to support this policy that my employer offered, I probably would have been in bankruptcy. And I'm not even saying it lightly. And I was someone who had a lot, like, I had risk managed, I had risk assessed. What if this goes wrong? How would I do this? But when one thing goes wrong, a lot of times everything goes wrong, and you need that financial cushion. So hopefully I answered that question.
Yeah, no,
but
that was a great answer.
Yeah.
I have one follow-up question. So the supplemental long-term disability insurance, you can just get it in the marketplace with
Yes.
I know
Yes.
that one was the mutual. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So you can just contact like any three. I say three because whenever I'm making recommendations to people, I always say speak to at least three people, three organizations, three companies, three anything, just so you can compare. But you could reach out to any of these insurance companies and ask them, let them know that you want to purchase a supplemental long-term disability policy. And of course, if you're self-employed, then you just want to purchase a long-term disability policy. I would say educate yourself about, like the questions that you need to ask, how much insurance you think you'll need, when you want it to kick in. So these are some of the things that you need to think about. For example, for me, when I purchased my supplemental policy, I knew that my employer's policy, and this is the case for most people, it doesn't kick in for 6 months. So if it doesn't kick in for 6 months, some employers do offer short-term disability, but it's also not 100% of your income. Not everyone offers short-term disability policy. So for me, even though I had an emergency fund, I just always felt that if I were to become disabled, I want mine to kick in at least 3 months. So I'm not using all of my emergency fund. And there's also a waiting period. So even though it kicks in 3 months, it doesn't mean you're going to get it in the 3 months, because they have to do their review and ensure that you're truly disabled before they pay you. And that could take an additional month or 2 months. So, yes, go out in the marketplace, contact 3 agents, and, they will work with you to help you to determine how much you need and things of that nature. But educate yourself first before you go out and start shopping, because you want to feel in a place of empowerment that you are asking the right questions, so you get the right policy that is going to work for you.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. What other products do you recommend? Because I heard a lot about life insurance, for example, too, and there seems to be maybe some debate about it. What's your take on life insurance, and who should or should not get life insurance?
Great question. And, it's interesting because sometimes people think I sell insurance. I have never sold insurance in my life. I worked for an insurance company for like 8.5 years. But even before that, I was always a big advocate of life insurance. And one of the things that I say about life insurance is that all the different products out there serve a purpose. There are very few insurance products that I'm like, no, never get it. There are a few. But the way that I like to counsel people about life insurance is you have to think about your financial situation, right? So if you are a younger person, you're just having children, what kind of lifestyle you want your children to have if you were to pass away? Because death is a real thing. Let's be for real. And if you're thinking, I want them to have the same lifestyle that I had, but once they get older, if I'm still around, I don't need to pass on a lot of money to them, then you get a term policy, and you get a term policy that will cover, whether it's 20 years or 30 years, up until your child gets to a certain age where you're like, well, if I die, they have a college education. We don't have to worry. I don't need to pass stuff on to them. There are other people who may say, but I want to leave a legacy. And so a term policy may not work for me. I want to have a whole life policy. And therefore, you want to shop around for a whole life policy that's going to work for you. The biggest thing that I like to say to people is affordability. Don't get into an insurance policy if you know that you cannot afford it. So if all you can afford is a term policy, even though you want to leave all this stuff for your child or children, but you know you're not going to be able to afford it, eventually the policy is going to lapse and then you will have nothing. So get a term policy, and there are also term policies that you can eventually convert to whole life policies. So maybe get that type of policy. So you have the option, if you start making more money, you can convert a part of it to whole life. So you're kind of secure. And then if you feel like you're someone who's like, yeah, I want to do this and I can't afford it, then you get the whole life policy. And there's like all these different variables in different types of policies in between that you can get to be able to keep you covered. But yes, I'm a big advocate of life insurance.
Yep, makes sense. Is there a similar advice to, let's say, if you don't think your employer sponsored life insurance is sufficient, you should go get the supplemental one?
So yes, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't care if it's enough or not. Get a policy that's outside of your employer. Here is why. If you get laid off tomorrow, your policy is gone, or you may have the option to convert it. But I have found that the policy that your employer offer, if you want to convert it to your own personal policy, it's much more expensive than going out and getting your own policy. I tried it, and I'm probably way overinsured anyway. But when I was leaving my employer, they gave me the option to convert some of the policy. And I was like, there's no way that I would do this, because I could go out and buy my own policy. And what a lot of people don't realize is that both long-term disability and life insurance policies, they're not portable. So even with a long-term disability, if you get laid off, right, you no longer have a long-term disability policy. If you go to a new employer and you become sick in the first month or 2 months, a lot of time they have a waiting period of 3 months or 6 months. So you're still totally not covered if you have left an employer and you don't have long-term disability. So those are things that are super, super important, that even though your employer might provide it, you want to have something on your own.
Got it.
So thank you for that question.
Yes, yeah, I'm asking kind of for myself as well. So thank you.
Got it.
And then I want to ask you about, for your own sort of wealth management, because I think you mentioned that you have a rental property or maybe multiple, and obviously you have your business now. What's sort of your overall strategy to build your wealth so that you can have multiple streams of income, right? Because that's what I heard, is that people who are creating wealth for themselves will have to have multiple income streams. And then when something doesn't go as right as you expected them to, at least you have other things to cover. So what's your sort of overall strategy for wealth building?
Yeah, great question. You're asking me some like really great questions that I get very excited about. Yeah, I am a big proponent of having different streams of income for obvious reasons, right? You get laid off, you need to be able to continue paying your bill. Yeah, you might get a severance package, and yeah, you might get unemployment. Most time it's not sufficient to cover you for a long period of time. So for me, again, like I remember in my early 20s, I was going to buy a co-op, and this mentor that I had said to me, instead of buying a co-op, why don't you get a house, rent parts of it out, you're single, live in the smallest part, and then you have rental income. Someone will pay your mortgage for you. And that was like a great strategy, because I bought a house, it had 3 units. And so I didn't really have to pay anything out of it. So I was able to use that additional income to do other things that I wanted to do with it. So whether it's like real estate, and there are those people who say, I don't want to have a tenant, I don't want to deal with all of this stuff. So it's like balancing it, right? So if you decided that's not what the thing that you want to do, because I've been very fortunate, I had great tenants until I ended up with this nightmare. So that happens, right? But you might say, okay, I don't want to do that. What else can I do? Well, you can potentially start a business. A lot of us have these great skill set that we're not using that could generate us income. And in today's world, where the internet, we have all these things available to us, we find something that we're passionate about and we see how we can monetize that. Because having that extra source of income, you could literally just take that income and start putting in your retirement plan so that you're bulking up on your retirement plan so that when you get ready to retire, or you have that flexibility to retire earlier than just, okay, I'm going to put money in my 401k plan at work and I'm going to retire at that point at that stage. And you'd be amazed at how just a small side hustle would end up causing you to just get rid of your job that you work for your employer for and just have that as income. But it's really important to diversify, because when one thing dries up, another thing might be able to help you. Like in my case, my tenant stopped paying rent, and there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into that. But I had started an Airbnb. So even though that income had dried up, fortunately, the Airbnb had been able to generate me more than the tenant who had left that apartment was paying. So that helped to supplement some of that lost income. Plus, my husband and I had started a tax practice many years ago. So that was a source of income that I was used, because as a CPA, right, you're going to work, but you have this little extra time that you could do things. And so even just being able to generate that source of income was also something else that we could do. So there are a variety of ways that we could generate extra income. Never rely on just an employer to provide you income, because once that goes away, you're kind of stuck.
Yeah, no, great advice. Yeah, so you mentioned that maybe people can turn their hobbies or passions into side income or even a side business. And I think in your case, the CPA qualification is certainly very helpful. But just for a normal person, how do they go about figuring out how to turn that into a monetization opportunity? Do you have any?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it's something that you might be passionate about, right? I'll give you an example. I have a client who she worked in corporate. She's worked in corporate her whole life, actually two. But she likes to create these trees and decorate them. And it's become like this big thing that has nothing to do with her corporate job. It's just something that she had a hobby, and now she's turned it into a business, and she's looking into other pieces of things that she can do as well to help to supplement this business. So she was actually recently laid off, and what we're talking, and she's not even in a panic or anything, because she has this business that she is in the process of creating or has created, which she believes can generate her income. And then I have another one who likes to create things. It's more like sewing. I don't know all the details of it, but that's something that she's doing. And a third one, the same one with the 1%, the 2% in her retirement plan. She decided that she loves I want to say the right word. Esthetician. I can never say that word properly. So she went and she took a course, and then she's doing that kind of stuff. Eventually she wants to open up a spa. So none of those, these are corporate people. Well, two of them are corporate. One of them work in the healthcare system. So nothing to do with their job or their profession. It's just things that they find interesting and exciting that they believe they can make money from. And so they're using those as their tools to make money.
Gotcha. Very helpful. All right. So I want to talk about your book, which is in the background, Broke to Wealth.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. When did you write this book?
I wrote this book. I actually released it on my birthday this year. You said when or why?
When, and I guess maybe the next question is why, and what does it talk about?
So yes, I released it earlier this year. And it was something that has always been inside of me, that I wanted to find a way to reach a broader audience, and maybe an audience that cannot at this point in time join my program. And I say that because a lot of times people think they can't, but it could be the best money saving thing that they do is join the program and figure out how to allocate their monies. But let's say they cannot, right? This book also, I've had college student who said, oh my God, this is so helpful. I'm so glad I have this. Now I can put all these things in place. And I've had people that are in their 60s that are saying, oh my God, this book is so good. because it's taught me a lot of things. This is a book with homework. And the idea of the book was to take someone who has no financial knowledge or very limited financial knowledge and take them to the steps of how to build wealth, whether it's mindset, whether it's budget, whether it's credit, whether it's debt, a little bit about investing and figuring out how do you assess your risk profile and how do you diversify, and then going into, hey, I need to diversify my streams of income. What are some of the things that I need to think about as I am diversifying my streams of income? And the great thing about the book is that you don't have to take it and read it chapter by chapter. I was very deliberate when I wrote it because I wanted someone who maybe they don't have any issues with credit to go and say, okay, how do I manage my debt? Or, you know what, I want to start a business, but I don't know how to go about doing that. I don't know how to even figure out, do I have enough time and things like that. So I lay out for individuals, okay, how do you do this? How do you assess what you're good at? How do you assess how much time you need to commit to this? Because let's be, again, for real, like there's a time constraint, especially if you're a mom with young children. Like, what can I do that's not going to take a lot of my time, but it's still going to be able to give me some extra income? And that's the idea of my book, Broke to Wealth, is to take you from where you are to a point where you can build wealth and build sustainable wealth.
Okay, great. Sounds like a good book. So you can get it wherever books
On
are sold?
Amazon.
Yeah.
On Amazon. Right now it's just on Amazon.
Just on Amazon? Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I'll go check it out. I also understand that you're a TEDx speaker.
Yes.
When did you do the TEDx talk?
So I did the TEDx talk in May as well. I guess May was a big month for me. Yeah. And this is, again, an example of how you can take a situation. I've always wanted to be a TEDx speaker. This was just like the stage that you want to be on, right? And I always thought that the story I would tell on a TEDx stage is just my personal story of how, you know, I came from Jamaica, undocumented, alone, and that would be my story and it would be inspirational. But when I was thinking about, okay, I need to get on the stage, you know, what do I want to talk about? I wanted to talk about my disability and how I had done all of these things, but then I suddenly became disabled and how that can literally send you into bankruptcy, because I feel like it's such an important topic to share with people just so that they could understand, like, this, the 1 in 4 Americans over the age of 20 will become disabled before they're retired. Like, that's such a crazy statistics, and just how many people file for bankruptcy due to medical conditions. So as I was going through my whole process of disability and all the stuff that came with it, I felt like it was just a topic that I needed to speak about more broadly than just, talking to my friends or talking to my clients. And that's how I ended up on the TEDx stage talking about, what you need to do to prepare, and some of the 3 key things that you needed to do to be able to ensure that you're prepared in case you become disabled. And I did also end up writing a book about it as well, because I felt like I got a lot of questions just from people that I was speaking to, like, hey, well, how do I prepare? Because the TEDx talk in 15 minutes is not going to give me all the answer. In addition to that, what are the steps, like details? So I put a lot of details in the book about, what you need to do, how you deal with medical claims with insurance companies, and what are some of the pitfalls. There's a lot that goes into it once you become disabled. And now it's garnered, I think, over like maybe 120 or over 140,000 views since I did it in May, but it was released in September. And I feel like that speaks to how important of a topic it is for many people to really start understanding a little bit more.
That's awesome. Actually, I'm curious, how do you apply to go on TEDx?
It's kind of a rigorous process, but there's information out there about all the different TEDx talks that are coming up. And one of the things that I learned was that it doesn't matter like what their topic is, because I think, what was the name of my topic again? I think it was called like End Game or something. They built everything into their overall theme. And so you just go and you look to see, you could just go online and see when are all the TEDx conferences, and then you just apply. I sent a video in to the organizers, and then they select you, and they will do a pre-interview. Some of them put you through 3 rounds of interviews. I think I did mine at a college in California. And when I spoke to the organizers, they said my story really spoke to them, and the lack of financial knowledge and all of this. And they really wanted to have that as a topic, but it had nothing. I shouldn't say it had nothing. The theme that they had, like if I just looked at the theme, I would have not applied. So if you're interested in applying for a TED Talk, just weave your talk and have a topic that you think will really resonate with folks, and they will select you.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Thanks for the tip. Speaking of college, right, and I understand that you have kids too, and college education is so expensive nowadays. There are so many people dedicated to kind of figure out this whole situation. Is it still worth it? What should we do if it's not a viable option anymore? What's the alternative? What's your view? And do you think college is still worthwhile? And if so, what are some strategies that we can either help our children to achieve that goal or somehow hack it, maybe? Yeah. I don't know if you have kind of...
Yeah, because I have one daughter that's a sophomore in college, and I have one that's going through the process now. It's a headache. It's very nerve-wracking. But for me, I still very much think that college is relevant and necessary. I also feel like in the underrepresented populations, it's very, very relevant. It's very necessary. Yes, there are trade schools that you can go to and other schools, and I would never discount those. There are also certification programs that you can get. But I find that a lot of times employers are still asking for a college degree. And depending on where you want to take your career, you need to go to college. My children want to be in the STEM field. They have to go to college. Someone who maybe want to do cybersecurity might say, I want to do a certification program. And it has worked for some people. But again, I would caution people, like, at this stage where we are, despite all the technologies, it may still be necessary to go to college. And I am still an advocate of going to college. And yes, the cost is astronomical. But what I will say is that for parents who have younger children, starting early to save is really important. Compounding is magnificent. When I started out saving for my children for college, my goal was like to have $500K in their college fund in total. I ended up surpassing it, and I can tell you that how I ended up surpassing it is I really believe, I'm a big stock market investor, and I'm a buy and hold. And I really believed that just putting the money in a 529 plan would not grow it fast enough. So I did 529 plan in full disclosure, but I also did outside of 529 plan. I invested in the stock market, and I just bought solid companies. I held on to them. Also full disclosure, because I'm so, I don't know what's the right word. Like, I planned everything out. Before my children were born, I had already started investing, and I said, if I have children, then I'm going to use this as their account. So I actually started investing before they were born. And the consistency is key. So whether you do a 529 plan, which is totally fine, or if you do what I did, just be consistent, keep putting the money in, watch how the money is growing. If you have grandparents or friends who give your children a lot of gifts, half the stuff that they don't need, ask them if they want to contribute to their 529 plan instead. So instead of the children having all this stuff around the house that you end up donating, you take that money and you put it in the investment, and you just stay consistent doing that. If you want to know, like if you're saying, okay, this is how much I want to have for my child. Like, I knew how much I wanted to have for my children, right? So I went on to, I don't know what site I used back then, but there's a site called investor.gov. that has a very simple compound interest calculator. You could just start playing with numbers and seeing how much would you need to invest monthly to achieve this goal, and what's the interest rate, or the interest rate that you would have to, or the return that you would need in order to have X dollars. Some people may say scholarships is the way to go. Great. But there is a limit on how much scholarship, right? And also being realistic, not all our children are going to get scholarship. So we always want to have that backup plan. Like if scholarship doesn't work, if tuition is $90,000 a year and you're not getting any type of award from the school, is it worthwhile? And this is where you start asking your question, like, do I send my child to a state college, or do I send my child to they're all prestigious universities, if you ask me. But if my child get into an Ivy League and my child get into a state college, right? I'm getting no tuition from the Ivy League, and this is a real life situation of people that I know. If my child get into the Ivy League and I have very little saved up for my child, or my child get into a state college, what am I going to do? And these are questions that parents grapple with. And I've had parents who said, I'm going to send them to the Ivy League anyway, because I demanded of them to work really hard, and hopefully the return from the Ivy is going to offset that the $300,000 or $400,000 tuition, where you have other parents who are like, you're not state school, that child's going to do great wherever they end up, so send them to the state school and not end up with this debt. Those are tough decisions, but I think that if you start early and you start being consistent, then at least when you get to that point, you will have a decent amount of money saved up, so the decision is not as nerve-wracking and stressful as it is if you have nothing.
Yeah. No, that's great. But what's your recommendation on how to invest? You mentioned you are a stock market investor, and for something like a college fund, I feel like you want to have high return, but you also don't want to be too risky, because there is a time limit at which point you still have to draw that out, so you can't predict the market. So what's your recommendation? Is it S&P 500 or something else?
For some people, they'll tell you straight S&P 500. It's safer. You're very diversified if you use S&P 500. And for listeners who don't know what that is, S&P 500 is where it's an index that tracks like the 500 of the more recognized companies. And so that's what you'd be buying, is all 500 companies moving. So some are going up, some are going down. You sort of balance out. And the S&P 500 has returned around 10%, 10.3, I think, over the past 30 years. So people recognize that it's being safe, and they're going to do that. And if you're doing that, and if you're saying the S&P returns 10% over the 30 years, and you're betting on that, then you really double your money in 7 years. I never really invested a lot in the S&P 500, because I learned how to invest in the stock market. And if someone's going to invest in stocks, I highly recommend that you first learn how to invest in the stock market and understand all of the risks that are associated with it if you're going to invest in individual stocks. For me, I felt individual stocks was the way to go because it will grow faster, and fortunately it worked out for me. And even though the market fluctuates, I feel like, okay, let's say the market goes down really badly this year and I needed to pull money out for my child for school, I'm okay taking out a loan and just waiting it out. For some loans, it will accumulate interest, but I'm okay with the interest over 4 years or over 5 years, right, as opposed to over 30 years. So that's a risk that I'm like, okay, I could take that. And because they also have their 529 plan, and that's invested in more diversified asset types. So at least I have that balance too. Plus, as I told you, I was like a big insurance person. So we have whole life insurance. There's cash value on that policy. So for me, like, I know that if the market goes down, there are other places that I could pull money out in the meantime, including taking out a loan to pay for their tuition until the market goes up. The risk, this is where you have to measure your risk and your willingness to take that risk. For me, like, it totally makes sense to take that risk. For someone else, they're probably like, you're crazy. I'm not going to take that risk. I would rather do something a little bit safer. I'm going to do S&P 500. I'm going to do index fund or mutual fund, any of those things. And I think that's perfectly fine. You would sit with whomever you have advising you, coaching you to help you to make those decisions. And then you can either set it and forget it, or you can decide, you know what, I'm going to take part of it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to take part of it and do that. There's so many different ways that you can go with that.
Wow. Okay. That's different, because I think a lot of the personal finance gurus out there will just say S&P 500. And I've heard that over and over and over. But I do agree that, if you are comfortable, if you have a sort of maybe higher risk tolerance and you have the knowledge and confidence, I think individual stocks could be the way to go. So do you use a financial advisor, or do you make your own individual stock picks?
So I had a stock market investment club in my 20s. Like, I co-founded it with a bunch of my colleagues, former colleagues and friends. And so we really learned how to invest in the stock market. I have not had a financial advisor since my 20s, after I had given my retirement plan over to one to manage, and my money kept going down because they were charging me so many fees. So I was just like, I'm going to learn. And in terms of investing in the stock market specifically, no, I learned. We started with the stock market investment club, and I continued. And if I invested in the S&P 500, like the amount that I wanted to have for my children, I would not have that amount when they got ready for college. So I picked stocks, I picked solid companies, and I just held on to it. Think about Apple. I bought Apple in 2003. It was like $20.
Wow.
And it split so many times, and the price has gone up so many times. If it was S&P 500, like I couldn't have made that kind of gain in a company like Apple, in a company like Moody's. I worked for them. So this is another thing, like for folks that are listening, if you work for a company that they're publicly traded, and a lot of them will offer what's called an employee stock, ESSP. I can't remember the words that are not coming out now.
Employment purchase program.
Yes. And so when I worked at Moody's Investor Services, I just started to put money away into buying their stock. They were a solid company. I felt very comfortable with them. And I've made so much money just like owning that stock, which the money came directly from my paycheck, never even noticed it was gone. So that's another great way for you to start investing and just putting money away and not even having to think about it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, so I think we covered a lot of ground. What's your advice for a young person? Let's say, what's the best advice that someone maybe in their 20s could get now, so that they're set financially on a successful path?
Great question. I think at this age, this is like the best age to give a person in their 20s advice, because you have such a long runway. I would say start out, I don't care how much you're making, get a budget. It's so important. It's something that people shy away from, but I often say having a budget is an empowering tool, because it's going to tell you how much you have coming in. It's going to tell you how much you're spending. And once you are equipped with that knowledge, you could make the adjustment that you need. Second thing, pay yourself first. Like, regardless of what's going on, because we're going to always find expenses that's going to pop up, like, oh my God, I can't put in my 401k plan anymore because this came up. If the only thing that you do is to put money in your 401k plan, especially if your employer offers a match, do that. Because and when you get a pay increase, or if you leave a job and you get a salary bump, that's even better. Because if you continue to live like the way that you were living, or maybe even a little bit above, because we want to have a little nicer lifestyle, but if you automatically start taking that money and putting it away, you never ever notice it. That's another thing that we could call it a hack, we could call it whatever. That's another thing that I did that made it easy to save for my retirement. Anytime I left my job or I got a pay increase or a bonus, like especially my bonuses, I would max out. Like my 401k plan was always maxed out, because between my bonus or going to a new job, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to put this away, because your bonus, you kind of have an idea, but a lot of times you don't, right? And if you tell yourself when you go to that job, I'm going to put half of my bonus or whatever percentage of my bonus inside of this account, you're going to plan accordingly. So come up with a financial plan, a financial goal for when you reach 40 or when you reach 50, whatever age that you're thinking that you want to retire or you have as a milestone goal. Like, for example, when I said 45, I want $1 million in my portfolio. Then you're going to start working towards that. You're going to spend on the things that align with your goals, because once you have that goal and you're working towards that goal, just never lose sight of your goal. Whether it's annually, biannually, you're going to go back. Okay, this was my goal. Am I meeting my goal? Am I getting close to my goal? What can I do to adjust? And once you start adjusting, it gets exciting, because you don't want to look at it as something that's restricting you. You want to look at it as something very empowering. Like, oh my God, imagine if I get to 40 and I have $1 million in my portfolio, or imagine if I do this, or imagine if I buy a house at this age. Like, those things are going to motivate you, and you're not going to feel like, oh God, I have this budget and it's just like killing me. Whatever you love, I always tell people, if there's something that you really love doing, right? Keep that in your budget. And all the other crap that is just like, I'm spending money on these things, but I don't really like them. I don't really want them. I have all of this stuff. That will go away when you are looking at your goal and you're creating your budget. And so in your 20s, like, definitely pay yourself first. Definitely have a budget. Even if you're living at home with your parents, have an emergency fund as well, and just set the goal and start working towards your goal. You will be surprised at how attainable that goal is. It's not as far-fetched, and it's not as difficult as it might sound.
That's awesome. So I also hear that, like, nowadays it's getting harder and harder for younger people. That's why I specifically asked for advice for the people in their 20s, the Gen Zs. And I sort of hear a lot about how, they graduate with a lot of debt, and then they start at a job. Maybe the real wage is not as much as it used to be, because inflation eats away a lot of that. So you still are optimistic that these individuals can get where they want to be, even maybe they're kind of starting a little bit behind compared to the generations before?
So I do want to acknowledge that, right? It's much harder. I mean, I have family member who making six figure, whose rent is $2,000, who's just like, oh my God, like, I'm getting the phone calls like, hey, what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
So it is harder. I'm not going to take away from that, especially if you have the student loan too, because the way student loan works, like, you could literally be paying that for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Want to bifurcate this. Let's say you live at home with your parents, right? You're making 100K. You've set this goal, okay, at 45, I want to do this. Your budget, like, you shouldn't still be spending a huge chunk of your money if you're at home. Even if you're paying part rent, most time parents are going to charge you very reasonable rent, hopefully. So you want to look at it this way, like, okay, I'm making $100,000. I'm paying my parents $600 a month. What am I doing with this extra money? I think, how much is going to student loan? So let's take that off the table, right? Because that might be a lot. If you have student loan, what I said before, honestly, may not work for you. As, like I said, it's not as hard. Like, it's going to be different if you have a huge amount of student loans. And I have to acknowledge that, because that is literally like having a mortgage. So, but if you're not someone who has that high student loan, then what I said stand. If you have a high student loan, your biggest thing that you're going to want to do is to start paying down those loans, because the interest rate adds up. This is where compounding is working against you. So focus on that loan and avoid lifestyle creep. I'm not saying don't go out. I'm not saying don't take a vacation, but you have to do that in moderation. And your student loan might be your goal. right? Like, I gotta pay this off. How do I do this? Other things that you can do if you have student loan, like if you work for certain organization or government entities, they will forgive your loan after a certain period of time that you've committed to them. So the job may pay you less, but imagine if you have $300,000 in student loan and after 5 years, the company will forgive it or forgive half of it, but you're making a little less. It's totally worthwhile. So you have to also balance those things out to see what's going to work for you. And another thing that I would say, that even though your goal is paying off your student loan, you don't want to completely neglect not putting something away for retirement, because the power of compounding is magical. And you want to have some amount of money, if it's even the amount that you're matching with your employer, being put away so that that could grow. And then your focus, if frankly, if you feel like you need to go home and live with your parents, even if you got to suck it up, you're an adult now, you don't want to deal with their voices, but you need to do that for a while in order to just really take your money and just be like paying off your student loan, then I would say do that. And then once you get to that steady state, then you can really start building. And this is where also side hustle comes in. If you have the ability, because I know some jobs you work like a dog, even though I heard that the millennial and the Gen Zers are changing that. But if you have the time to be able to generate that extra income that you could pay off the student loan, then you want to do that as well.
Okay, that was really great advice. So 2 last questions for you. Do you have any book recommendations?
Yeah, let me see if it's on my shelf. I think it's not on my shelf anymore. But of course, Broke to Wealth is one of those books that you definitely want to pick up. But like when I was even starting out, one of the books that I read, and it's not a personal finance book, Think and Grow Rich. Like, I believe that it gives your mindset a completely different shift in terms of how you think about building wealth. I also think that the Millionaire Next Door, because that one really tells you about just how simple, like, people live very simply, and the ones that you think have a lot of wealth, they don't, because they spend on a lot of things that is not necessary, but they want to live this lifestyle. But you have people who live very simply, who build wealth over time, and some of them just have regular jobs. So I think those books, and I'm drawing a blank now, because there's another book that I really like that I recommend to a lot of young people. I think I might have to send it to you so that you could put it on the podcast. But I for some reason it's eluding me, and I was
The Simple Path to Wealth.
Yeah. It's not that one.
Okay. Psychology of Money.
Psychology of Money is another book actually that's actually really good as well, because it's really, any book, it's not always about do this and this for the finances, but it's like, how do you think about wealth, and how is it going to shape the things that you do? The guy that I'm thinking of, right, I can't think of it, but it's an Indian guy. He's very popular. Rami, I can't remember his name for some reason.
I'll Teach You How to Be Rich.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's very simple. It just takes you through, again, like, very simplified way of thinking. And there's a lot of people, especially in your 20s, if you're starting out, like, how do I want to think about wealth and building wealth? And it's very, very simple.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good book. I think all those books you mentioned are great. All right. Last question. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah. So my website is growyourwealth10x.com. So you can always find me there. There's also a bunch of free resources on my website as well. And that's the same handle for my Instagram at growyourwealth10x. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Tanya Taylor, CPA, MBA. So those are mainly where I am right now.
Okay, awesome. This has been great. Thank you so much, Tanya, for your time. Learned a lot.
Oh, absolutely. This was great. Thank you so much for having me.